And as I grew older and, started to develop, I wouldn't say like a sexual attraction quite yet, but like an attraction, a pull towards males, I recognized that as being, extremely, extremely sinful. So I would be praying and praying and praying to God to please take this away. He just never did. He and the gender therapist were, telling me that I wouldn't be loved or accepted as a feminine gay person, that I had to do this to be normal, and that my dating pool would get wider if I was a woman because I'd be dating straight men. They really put it in my head that if I grew into a man, I would just be so unrecognizably ugly that I might as well commit suicide.
Oh my God.
And then, given some of the conversations he had with me in private later, I feel as if there is a sexual undertone to this. Because why else would a pediatric clinic be connected to a store that sells sex toys?
So, Jonni Skinner, you're very, very welcome on to our podcast. I met you a long time ago with Sasha. And, at the time, you were like somebody who was just coming to terms with something so massive that neither me nor Sasha could actually contemplate how big it was. And it felt like at the time, a kid just kind of going, I'm trying to give everybody the benefit of doubt here. I'm trying to see the goodness in everybody, but I'm feeling very despondent about how things have gone. And now it's a good year and a half later, and I think you have processed a lot. You've been through a lot, and I think you have a lot to say. So would you like to bring us from the beginning and tell us your story?
Yes. So I spent 8 years as a trans girl, I guess, my whole adolescence. Um, I had been led to believe that this was the only treatment for me, that nothing else would work.
And maybe begin at the beginning, like when you were a little boy. I think you were a classically feminine little boy. Is that right?
Yeah. When I was really little, I had a diagnosis for high functioning autism. So I already, kind of had a spotlight on me from a very young age, especially in the medical field. And, I was often picked on in school for like the way that I walked, the way that I talked, how I talk with my hands all the time, very expressive. And some of my interests, you know what I mean? Like I liked Disney princesses. A lot of my friends were girls, and this was not very welcome where I came from. I came from a very very small town, a one red light town in the middle of rural Michigan. So having this very effeminate little boy, many people um, did not take very kindly to that, or did not know how to take very kindly to that.
And you had the added uh, challenge of you were diagnosed with autism when you were about 4 or something.
Yeah, and, naturally, that came with its own set of, challenges, especially, in regards to, like, I don't know, like, socializing, because I was often separated and in special ed programs due to my autism. I was very social, but I did need help with things like mathematics and English and such. So I was already segregated very often. My apparent femininity from a very young age only exacerbated that. So it led to me being very isolated and alienated a good portion of my childhood. There was a lot of discussion since I was young, like, is this a natural behavior or is he just confused? I remember specifically there was one scandal when I was still in the ISD, where I had held hands with a boy and called him my boyfriend. And everyone freaked out. It was a big scandal in the school. I wasn't allowed to see this kid ever again. It was a really big deal. And I feel like having that in my record as a young child led to a lot of my therapists treating me like I was just confused from a very young age. So that was sort of how I began developing my identity. I was just like, oh, well, I'm just confused. I don't know, what's going on. I felt very alienated and very not accepted from a very young age. Um,
Uh, And am I right in thinking like you were from a religious background that certainly you became very, very religious. And
Yes.
so that was a kind of hyper fixation nearly.
Well, due to being very socially alienated, I believe, and having autism, which naturally leads to some amount of obsessionality and ruminating, um, I really took to fundamentalist Christian religion very, very zealously. Like, I legitimately believed from a very young age that, God was watching and judging every single thing that we do, and that most people were subject to sin.
And that homosexuality is a sin.
Oh yeah, arguably one of the biggest because it's a sexual sin. It's connected to the flesh, which was deemed demonic in the religion that I came from. From a very young age, I would be compulsively, I would say, praying to God because I just felt wrong in myself. You know what I mean? Um, and as I grew older and started to develop, I wouldn't say like a sexual attraction quite yet, but like an attraction, a pull towards males. I recognize that as being, extremely, extremely sinful. So I would be praying and praying and praying to God to please take this away. He just never did. So naturally, that led me to feeling very, what's the right word? Almost like claustrophobic, but within myself, because it's something you can't escape. It just grows stronger, the older you get. And I believe that that partly led to my developing of body dysmorphia as I approached puberty. I became very insecure with myself. I started getting peach fuzz on my legs, and to me, that was like the end of the world. I was like, "Oh no." And just things like that. I became very, very dysmorphic. It started with me just like checking like, "Oh, I got a little new eyebrow hair growing there," and I would hyperfixate on that. And when I wasn't hyperfixating on my appearance, I was compulsively praying for God to just make all of this go away. Um, and it was around that time that I had started to discover trans people via the internet. I didn't necessarily fall into any trans forums that I recall, but I saw people like Jazz Jennings from I Am Jazz, or what was the other one? Gigi Gorgeous, who previously was Gregory Gorgeous, who I'd followed some of the makeup reviews that he used to do. So then seeing him change over and all the acceptance that he got from being feminine gay man to transitioning.
But in your
Um,
immediate environment, in the little small town you lived in, there were probably no openly gay people, no example,
mm-mm.
no one you could point to and say, this is, even in my town, this is a real thing.
No, none. I mean, even when I was finishing elementary school, I was in a Lutheran private school, so there was no examples of gay people anywhere. The only examples I had really of the gay community were not so savory examples from like pride parades and stuff that of course my school would be like, "Oh, it's Sodom and Gomorrah." You know what I mean? So that was my only introduction really to what being gay could be, was this like
So
hypersexualized image.
I'm kind of getting a picture of little Johnny. So you were diagnosed with autism and having difficulties in that front, and then hyper religious. Maybe that was a symptom of autism, or maybe it was a reflection of the community, which
I feel like
was
it's a little bit
homophobic.
of both. My autism,
Yeah,
I feel like, predisposed me to develop an obsession over this religion, and I had a lot of black and white thinking around it. Um, but I only was able to develop such a strong religiosity because of the community I was around.
yeah. And as well as that, your mom, like she was a single mother, but she had her own challenges insofar as she was married to a guy who was homophobic and difficult in his own way. So you weren't getting a break anywhere, as far as I can see.
No, not really. And my brother was extremely homophobic too. Like, he often called me slurs, or like he would like sing just like mocking songs. Like one of them I remember was like, "You're so gay. I bet you think this song is about you." And he would just do crap like that all the time, or joke about me catching AIDS and stuff like that. That was the environment that I came from. It was very mocking. And if I wasn't being mocked for it, I was being told I was going to go to hell. Because a lot of people, I think, from my mannerisms, kind of picked up that I was going to be different. Even in my own family, there was a lot of gossip since I was very young as to whether or not I was going to grow up to be gay or not. And naturally, that bled over into the church as well. So there were a lot of people that I think suspected it and treated me differently because of it.
And so it's not, you wouldn't need to be Freud to say, and so you developed self loathing, a complete body loathing, self loathing, body dysmorphia, gender dysphoria. And why wouldn't you in that environment?
I really did. I felt like because you come from a religious background, so you have a strong belief in, like, I guess, like, body soul dualism or whatever. So I really felt like my body was the problem. You know what I mean? That's what was developing this draw to other men. That's what was developing in ways that I didn't understand at the time, because in a Christian school, we didn't really have biology class. So I had really no like context for the changes that my body was starting to go through. So that made it all the more uncomfortable when I did start to approach the changes of puberty. And it really led me to hyperfixate on it. I got to a point where I had to avoid all mirrors. I was letting my hygiene go because I just could not stand to look at myself. And when I found these transgender YouTubers, some of them had described very similar feelings. And as I watched them go through their transitions, I watched, some change in lifestyle and how they presented themselves, whether or not that was placebo, you know. But I did see some change. And in my child mind, I was like, well, maybe that is the way out. So that was sort of the seed being planted, as it were. I talked to my mom a little bit about it, and she was going to take me to University of Michigan, had a really big like social worker department, but we ended up in a gender clinic as that was growing at the time. And my social worker that I had spoken to really didn't try to counsel me through any of the body dysmorphia, or didn't try to acknowledge my extreme religiosity, or try to talk to me about like older men online that I had been talking to, or early childhood sexual events. She just really echoed the idea that transitioning would solve all of my problems. She tried to say that like my bad thoughts were an inner feminine voice that just needed to be expressed. She echoed the idea that the gay community is indeed a very sexual community, and if I needed or wanted to be loved, I would have had to have taken this route to present as female. Um,
Would it be accurate to say that she was sort of echoing like a hope that you had? Because it sounds like when you discovered what, the idea of trans, that it was like a potential salvation from some of the self-loathing.
I believe so. I believe that she sort of listened to, because it started off with me kind of venting and telling her my life story and my background and how I felt about things. So I think that she definitely used some of my own fears and prejudices to kind of convince me that this was the definite path to go. And she did it very expertly. Like, she seemed very friendly at the time. She, had a big smile on her face. She felt very inviting, and very inviting personality for a troubled kid. I remember my mom going in there next and just hearing her wail because this gender therapist had pulled the, do you have a living daughter, or you could have a dead son. um and that was the route that it had turned. And this gender therapist convinced me that this was the treatment to try out. They were talking about it being a temporary pause in time in the beginning, but don't believe I was old enough to get blockers at the time, or my insurance didn't cover it or something. So they started, she was going to refer me to an endocrinologist to start cross sex hormones.
And at
As a
this stage, you were 13, and
13
you
years
like,
old.
if I'm right, you were, born around 2003 or something.
I was
And
born in the end of 2002.
yeah, so you were 13, it was about 2016,
Mhm.
and you'd had really trouble from the beginning until you're 13. You hadn't got a break. And then you were in an extraordinary move in 2016. Rather than prescribing you puberty blockers, they went straight, and you weren't actually, I think, in puberty, or certainly hadn't got into Tanner stage 2.
So I don't believe that I think I was a late bloomer because I was just getting peach fuzz on my legs. I didn't really grow any hair on my armpits or on my face or anything like that. And I didn't really have like a sexual draw yet. I didn't even have erections yet, to be completely frank. And
Why did they prescribe estrogen? Why did they go so far so fast?
I can't really answer that. In the endocrinologist's notes, he says that I had clear gender dysphoria that warranted treatment now. But I only became so incredibly dysphoric because he and the gender therapist were, telling me that I wouldn't be loved or accepted as a feminine gay person, that I had to do this to be normal, and that my dating pool would get wider if I was a woman because I'd be dating straight men. They really put it in my head that if I grew into a man, I would just be so unrecognizably ugly that I might as well commit
Oh
suicide.
my God.
So that really, it exacerbated my body dysmorphia by a degree I really have a hard time putting words to. Like, it really made my body dysmorphia go from like maybe a 7 or an 8 to like 100. I mean,
you know,
it
in
was like pouring gasoline on the fire.
in a different way and on a different scale, this is happening all around the world. With every time a teacher at an elementary school suggests that you might be in the wrong body or have different pronouns. I mean, it's all iatrogenic. It's like creating the condition that supposedly we're trying to ameliorate.
I mean, you are spot on there because I honestly cannot think of a worse thing to tell a child than you're in the wrong body. Your whole body is wrong.
Wow.
I remember hearing that message for the first time from a doctor, from an authority figure who's supposed to be honest and have my best interest.
Yeah.
And that just like, it felt like a stab in the heart. It was like my whole world. My world, I already thought my world was crashing down. I had no idea. That made my whole world come down. And on top of that, when I was in the endocrinologist's office, my first appointment with him, I remember my mom and I were in the room, the gender therapist was there, and he brought in a whiteboard to kind of do a demonstration of how this could even happen. Because they were trying to say that I had an inner feminine essence. So he gave a biological explanation to that. And he said that I came about this way. I was not gay, or this isn't a psychological thing. I had an actual female brain in a male body. And he explained that that can occur through hormonal imbalances in the prenatal environment. So basically, my testosterone must have been delayed, so my brain would have developed, and then the testosterone came in and masculinized my body, is how he explained it.
Oh
So
my
that
God.
sort of even further convinced me that this is the only way to go because it has a biological basis. And obviously, that was made it very hard for my mom to really protest very much because now he's giving a biological explanation. And I remember in that first appointment when they were talking about hormones, my mom was like, "Well, shouldn't we wait until he's 18 before doing permanent changes?" And I remember him looking at her and saying that They know I'm a ward of the state because my dad, and I should have explained this more clear in a previous episode. I was a ward of the state because my dad was very abusive. He was also an alcoholic. So he's not present in my life. And because of that, the state had partial custody of me. That's just how the law works in Michigan, or did at the time. And this doctor knew that. I don't know how. It must have been in my medical records. And he threatened my mom with that. If she was not an accepting home, they could remove me from the home, and I would have gotten those treatments anyways elsewhere. So, and I remember when that came up, just seeing like, I mean, I'm sure you could imagine how that would affect a parent. And that's what really, that's how a lot of this happened, because they were willing to do that.
And the
So,
endocrinologist, when you were 13, if my memory serves me correct, misdiagnosed you or created a false diagnosis um, of you that was not true.
yes, he diagnosed me with an endocrine disorder related to puberty, which was not correct. I had no issues with my hormones, really, and there's nothing in my medical records that show that I had any abnormal hormone issues. I would have just been a late bloomer, is all, which is not an endocrine disorder. And I think he did that, as far as I'm aware, because at the time in 2016 in my state, I don't believe I was old enough to legally be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. That's the intel that I've gathered from speaking to so many attorneys.
You
I
got
was not
diagnosed
old
with
enough.
that a year later when you were 14.
Yes.
So they first kind of prescribed you estrogen. I want to spell this out so people are very clear just how
Hmm.
much you were mistreated. 20, when you were 13, 2016, you were misdiagnosed or diagnosed with endocrine disorder related to puberty. You had no hormone problems. You just hated your body and you hated
Yep.
yourself. And then when you're in 2017, a year later, you were diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and then they gave you puberty blockers. But you were already presumably growing breasts and growing hips.
Correct. The rationale behind giving me puberty blockers at the time was, well, they believed it was a more efficient way to block testosterone, but I was having issues on the testosterone blocker spironolactone. I was very small, 13-year-old. I only weighed like 108 pounds or something. So I was fainting on spironolactone. It would make me dizzy and I would like black out and fall. And it was making me very sick. So he eventually switched me over to hysterelin acetate, which comes in the form of an implant about, I would say, about that long, and they put it in your arm. I had the incision scar and the removal scar, and that implant was expected to last 4 years. However, I had it removed at about 2.5 years due to some extreme side effects I was experiencing that I did not have prior to the blocker. And those involved like extreme muscle spasms. I wasn't able to be in school at the time, too. This is also important. He discouraged me from going into school. He said that there was too high of a risk that I would be bullied and it just wasn't okay. So he encouraged me to be homeschooled until I finished my transition.
GenSpec's Bigger Picture conference series returns for its fourth landmark international event this September, the 27th and 28th, Saturday and Sunday, in Albuquerque in New Mexico. At this time, we're not just analysing problems, we're shaping the solution. We're looking for a way forward, and we've chosen the best speakers, the best leading thinkers of our generation to discuss how we can move the dial. With the theme Live Not by Lies, Conversation for a Culture in Crisis, this year's conference tackles one of the most urgent challenges of our time: how to speak truth in the face of conformity, confusion, and institutional pressure. As the politicisation of sex and gender continues to divide societies and derail thoughtful discourse and destroy loving and engaged families, this groundbreaking counterpoint to WPATH brings together the world's leading thinkers, clinicians, policymakers, lawyers, politicians, and psychologists to forge a path that is ethical, evidence-based, and grounded in reality. Abigail Schreier will expose the hidden consequences of bad therapy. Dr. Lisa Littmer will present her latest groundbreaking research. Lionel Shriver lays bare how society's fixation on trans identity distorts truth and undermines fundamental freedoms. Peter Boghossian will present Truth Over Lies, Bold Conversations in a Fractured Culture. Dr. Patrick Lappert will discuss the impact of trans surgery, while Dr. Quinton van Meter will discuss the impact of hormones. Following defining events in Killarney, Ireland, in Denver, Colorado, in Lisbon, Portugal, we're now coming to Albuquerque in New Mexico. This is more than just a conference, it's a call to action. Join us for 2 days of unflinching honesty, rigorous evidence and solution-focused collaboration. It's time to move the dial and you need to be in the room. Visit genspec.org to secure your place.
At the time that all of this was happening, was there any part of you that was like suspecting, well, maybe these people don't know what they're doing, or suspecting motivations or anything? I mean, I know you were super young, so.
Yeah, I was very young, and I will say even though I have a different outlook now that I'm older and look back at the time, they were presented themselves very friendly. They were always smiling. You come in and shake our hand, talk about his family, our family, compliment my mom on stuff, compliment me and my appearance. So I didn't suspect anything. In fact, I thought that these people had my best interest at heart. I remember in one of the first appointments, him telling me that because my mom would always try to tell me that I look just fine the way I am. You know, she was just trying to be a mom. And he would say that that's not true. She's only saying that because she's my mom and she wants me to feel better in the moment. But he has my best interest at heart for the long run. So when you hear that as a young child, and this man is very friendly, he's emailing me outside of the medical setting as well to my personal email, sending me articles on like intersex conditions and stuff.
And he's not CCing your mom when he's doing that. He's just doing it directly to you and she doesn't
Yep.
know?
Yep. They
Wow.
often had my mom taken out of the room for them to have private discussions with me. Every single appointment. He would spend about anywhere between 45 to 80 minutes with just me, every single
Wow.
appointment.
And the reason why he misdiagnosed you with endocrine disorder related to puberty when you were 13 was so that you would get the insurance so that you could pay for the cross-sex hormones he was prescribing.
Yes, and it mentions in a roundabout way, it hints at that in my records because it says that we were dealing with significant financial constraints, and we were leading a nomadic existence. We were living hotel to hotel at the time. I believe that the endocrine disorder was both to cover, the fact that I was being treated with cross sex hormones at such a young age, but also to get insurance coverage because my insurance covered pretty well all of this.
And after that, I know you had, and you can talk about that more if you like, bad symptoms as a result of these very early, prescriptions. But then he misdiagnosed you again with effectively kidney stones, even though it seems like it was a symptom of having been prescribed a puberty disorder blockers.
Yes. So, when I was 14, I was put on puberty blockers. I immediately started getting like awful hot flashes, terrible hot flashes. Now I get muscle spasms. We call them Charlie horses. You might not know that term, but they're like extremely painful muscle spasms. So I would like wake up and my legs and my arms would all just be twitching out of my control extremely painfully. I was trying to get into high school at the time, but I was just too emotionally dysregulated to really be in school. And this made it really hard to be in school because I'd be like walking down the hall and I would collapse from these spasms and nobody would believe me. So I missed a lot of school and ended up homeschooling again during my freshman year of high school, I believe, because I couldn't go to school. I was having muscle spasms every day. I had it was the worst depression I ever had in my life. I was developing urinary incontinence and sexual dysfunction issues. So like I hadn't had erections previously, but now when my body was trying to, they were extremely painful. Like it was like needles were just being driven through there. It was extremely painful. And I'd started peeing blood as well, which the doctor never wanted to address. Um, so I ended up seeing another doctor at a different hospital, and they found an ulcer that had formed on the back of my bladder. Due to inexplicable reasons, they never found any bacteria or any kind of pathology. They don't really know what happened. I just developed an ulcer.
But you were a 14-year-old who'd been on estrogen for a year and who was on puberty blockers. So they hadn't a clue what they were doing.
Exactly. And they gave me some medication to kind of help that go away. And around that time, my mom had just thrown an absolute fit at my endocrinologist and eventually pushed him hard enough that he took the blocker out. And not long after that, I still had urinary incontinence, but I stopped peeing blood, and my muscle spasms started to get a little bit better. But by that point, I had lost weight. I had basically no muscle tone left. I just shriveled away, basically. The blockers took such a huge toll on my body. I was just so weak after I came off of them, Stella. It was horrific. And, since then, I still have side effects from just the estrogen. He also had me on progesterone when I was 16, because he said it would reduce my likelihood of developing any kind of cancer, which I now know is not true. So I really do feel like I was just being experimented on that whole time. Now that I've been an adult and I've been off this stuff and I've spoken to a few attorneys and doctors and I've had stuff reviewed, it really just seems like there was no sound plan or science behind what they were doing to me.
I just wanted to ask, like at 15 or 16, roughly around the time that you're narrating, I mean, usually a young boy, gay or straight, is thinking about one thing 24/7. I'm slightly exaggerating. Where was that for you? Were you thinking about sex, or was everything shut off? Or
So I had some questions as to how this stuff was going to impact my sexual development. Obviously, my mom did too, but my doctor would always shame my mom and tell her that was wildly inappropriate. But when he had her leave the room, I did have some curiosity about it. I wouldn't say I had a strong desire. Now that I've been off stuff for a year, I have had some recovery. It's still probably not where it should be, but some recovery. And what I have now, like, I didn't know anything then. I just had a slight draw to men, if that makes sense. It was more emotional than it was sexual. But because my mom had these questions, naturally, I also had these questions as to how is this going to impact my development. And my endocrinologist told me that it would shape my musculature to a female musculature, so I would just operate with a feminine response cycle. So he told me that I would have multiple orgasms, when I was having erectile issues, like painful erections. I mean, it felt like broken glass was in my stuff. It just was awful on these blockers. He had suggested, he said, well, that's not the only way to get sexual pleasure. There's, anal and, all of these other ways to have pleasure. So don't get too caught up on this one thing. So in private, he would have those conversations, but obviously they were very misleading. He never had those in front of my mom.
I can't wait to meet you in New Mexico. You're going to speak at our conference in
me
Albuquerque.
too.
Yeah, I just can't wait to meet you in real life, Johnny. I think it's going to be very moving. And I'm looking forward to hearing you talk about it, because you're going to talk about the cost of early medicalisation. And you kind of teed me up to the question I was going to ask anyway, which was to say that there was a sexual element to this. So it's like, I think there was some inappropriate sexual stuff anyway, and then there was men online at a young age, there was exposure to porn, and then there was pretty profoundly inappropriate direction and guidance from your endocrinologist.
Yes, and the gender therapist. Excuse me for my story being all over the place. Obviously, this was,
You're brilliant.
but I'm going to tell the audience. Obviously, this was a very traumatic thing, and this was most of my adolescence. So putting this in a timely order can be very difficult when you've dealt with so much of this stuff. That's a lot to organize in your brain. So, to talk about what the gender therapist did, her and the endocrinologist both wanted me to go to a store to get like bra fillers and like padding for my hips and stuff because they wanted me to like be going out with a feminine silhouette. And the store that they sent us to, the gender therapist sent us with her business card with the university on it and a sticky note attached to it. We drive out to this pretty indiscreet like building. Um, and the owner meets us at the door, looks at the card, takes the note, and hands the card back to my mom and escorts us into it's a store for like cross dressing, right? So at first you walk in, you see wigs and like high heels, but in the back where the breast forms were, there were, sex toys and like flesh underwear to make it look like men had, female genitalia, fetish wear, and the breast forms were not just cloth breast forms like we were thinking. They were like cyberskin silicone breast forms with like realistic nipples, and it was all very, very sexualized. I never wore this stuff. We got it, but I threw it away a couple weeks later and never wore it because it felt
What
so.
age were you?
I was 13. It just felt so uncomfortable, you know what I mean? And sexual, it did feel it was a sexual store. It was a sex shop. And I'll never forget that. You know, it was traumatic. It really was. And I never wore the stuff and they put me on the hormones anyways, so I never really fulfilled their quote unquote program of dressing as a girl. I just wore hoodie and sweats and I was put on cross sex hormones.
Because you were going by Johnny and he him, is that right?
I was, yeah, yeah, yep.
Oh,
Johnny, he, him. I
uh,
dressed pretty much like a normal boy at the time. So,
your
yeah.
whole story, including the kind of pseudoscience quackery explanations of some of your caregivers, just it sounds like they were having you kind of fulfill one of their sexual fantasies about what's supposed to happen. I mean, it does feel like you were just led on
So,
a path to fulfill a fantasy that was not grounded in anything that we would call science or even care.
and going off from that, I do believe now that I'm older and I've spoken to other doctors and lawyers about how certain exams and such are supposed to go. I do believe that there is a sexual undertone to a lot of this. Just given some of the conversations that were had, my first physical exam as well went on for quite a while. And there was a very uncomfortable energy in the room, if you understand where I'm getting at. I even asked my mom about it. I was like, well, that lasted a while and felt really uncomfortable with him down there. But everyone at the time, it was explained to them that it was like a sports exam. So everyone just kind of dismissed it. And to a certain degree, endocrinologists are supposed to check, your
Mhm.
genitalia and all of that. But this lasted a long time. And then given some of the conversations he had with me in private later, I just I feel as if there is a sexual undertone to this. Because why else would a pediatric clinic be connected to a store that sells sex toys? And I've just been left with that question all these years. Like, yeah, I do believe this was like a new form of conversion therapy that I went through. But at the same time, why is there all of this sexual undertone to it as well? You know what I mean? That's been very disturbing to me. And that's a huge driver in me wanting to speak out and tell my story because I just have a really bad feeling in my gut about a lot of this that it's a lot worse than it just seems on the surface.
I know you feel strongly that the abuse of power and the silencing of victims is a major role to play in this.
Absolutely. I later on with when I had felt like I was backed with some counsel, I went on to amend some of my records because once I had received my medical records, I found that many of the conversations that were had, many of the details were not in there. They would write in that everything was fine, that I was happy. At one point, he put in there that I wanted the blocker out because I wanted more curves. None of that is true. They completely falsified my records. There was one from the gender therapist where she put in that I wanted to cut off my genitalia. I've never had self harm to that degree. I have self harmed as a young child, but not to the degree of cutting off my genitalia, like she said. And that's where I feel there's a huge imbalance of power there. And that creates a lot of difficulty for victims like me now, like if we were to try to seek legal recourse, because all the power is in the hands of these professionals and they get to dictate the story.
And even forming a case and really clarifying your story, I think requires a lot of emotional turmoil. I mean, just going back to these memories and reliving them, it's not an easy task by any means.
Well, to some extent, yes. In other areas, though, because it has impacted my body in such a way, I'm haunted by these memories every day. You know what I mean? Like, it's changed my body in such a way. I have fully developed breasts, I have hips. I'm much small, like I'm tall, but I'm much smaller than the average male. So wherever I go, I'm followed by this and naturally people always have questions about my past. So it comes up a lot. So in that pit in my stomach, I just feel like I feel very wronged by all of this, and I feel like there's more to it, because I had my mom there. At least, even though she wasn't in the room, she was around. I can only think, well, what would have happened if they did remove me from the home?
And they diagnosed you as well around growth, didn't they? They did some sort of, you had a growth disorder when you didn't. Another misdiagnosis.
When I was 14, he diagnosed me with tall stature when I was 5'7" because he said I would never pass as a woman and I would have a hard time finding a husband if I was above 6 foot. And he assumed me at if I was left alone, I would have been around like 6'1" or 6'2". So he upped my estrogen intake to fuse my growth plates to stunt my growth. So I'm 5'8". I only grew an inch after that diagnosis, which is illegal in Michigan as well. It's height discrimination. You're not allowed to just play with people's height willy nilly. So that is also in my record.
You raised an issue that I think is relevant to a lot of people who have transitioned and detransitioned. You present as very androgynous. You said that you've still got breast tissue. As a young person dating, I imagine that is really difficult, and I don't know how you or anyone else navigates that. I mean, actually I do have some idea, but what can you say anything about that?
So initially, I was led by this endocrinologist to believe that my dating pool would be wider because I would be dating straight men. But that is not the case. When I started dating initially, I was only my options are severely, severely limited, right? Not very many gay men are interested in somebody that has developed breast tissue or a high voice or a feminine figure. So that left me with what they would call like trans attracted men, which sure there are some good people out there, of course. However, I found that for the majority, it is indeed a fetish. So from my early dating life, I was very fetishized and I didn't really have any sexual desire because even though I was off the blockers, I was still on a very high dose of hormones. So for me, to have those interactions was extremely painful. And I didn't have a lot of interest in it. It just was sweaty and gross and not what I wanted. And these men weren't really able to connect emotionally because to them, I was an object. There is also an element in that of there's a subsection of these kinds of men that like an underdeveloped body. And because I always had short hair, and presented somewhat androgynously tended to attract those men over the more average trans attracted men that want, basically just a woman but with male parts. I tended to attract men that liked the idea of a small, underdeveloped stuff. So that led to a lot of fetishization and a lot of unfortunate events that had happened to me as I was growing up as a young adult in this life. And even to this day, I haven't really been able to hold down like a steady relationship. I've been with men that played it off like we were in a relationship until it actually came up, and they did not want that to be public. They just wanted it to be a hidden thing. These men are also have exclusively been older than me, by significant degrees. That's just who I attract.
When did you come to decide that you wanted to stop medical transition?
So towards the end of 2023, I was just very, I was getting to be very disenchanted.
So you were about 20 or so, was it?
I would have been 21. I was just getting very disenchanted and I was very lost. I had a different endocrinologist at this time. My last endocrinologist pretty well ghosted me when I started to confront him on, some of the things that he had told me as a kid. I was just crying to this new endocrinologist, like, I'm just so miserable and so lost. And she made the suggestion for me to lay off of stuff, which I freaked out at because I was convinced that I needed this and I've never even considered going off of this stuff. You know what I mean? Every doctor I had seen over my medical issues over the years never connected them to the hormones. So I just thought I was a sickly person. Around that time, I don't remember, that must have been the beginning of 2024 when the WPATH files officially dropped, from your colleague Mia. I'm a very big
Yeah.
fan of her work.
Yeah.
Um, and I read those and I was like, oh my God, everything I had been led to believe was a lie. And my whole world came crashing down again. I was like, wow, it's so devastating, but makes so much more sense. Because by this point, also, I had been out working, so was starting to understand that what I had been led to believe about the gay community was also a lie. It was just like finding one lie after another, and I just quit the stuff. I just was like, well, you know what, I don't even know what to believe anymore. So, and I'm sickly on this stuff. And if all the science I had been led to believe was true on this, that this has no side effects and it's great and this, that, and the other, and all of that wasn't true, well, then I'm not going to take this stuff. So I went off of the hormones towards, I would say somewhere in between December of 2023 and January of 2024, I had officially went off the hormones. Somewhere in that time bracket. It's really hard to remember because it was a very emotional time for me, as I'm sure you could imagine.
Did you
And what is, yeah.
experience withdrawal of any sort? What's it like to go off hormones?
So had hot flashes while I was on them, but when I started going off, I got like more intense hot flashes. Like they were so intense, I would get sick to my stomach and like lightheaded. I would break out in cold sweats. I had some muscle spasms, but not as bad as I was on the blockers. It just, I just felt sore everywhere. I had shifts in appetite. My emotions naturally were all over the place. It was very dysregulated at the time, which is why I, have to look to my record to give a exact timeline to everything because, going through all of this, it's very, very emotional. Um, it it was a lot. I was very fatigued all the time. Like, I would wake up in cold sweats, and I never felt rested, ever. I started getting, like, swollen lymph nodes all over the place, which, they never found an explanation for it, but it coincided with the time that I was going off of the hormones. And then they went down after about, like, I'd say 6 to 8 months of being off of them. Um, I started to get like my sexual development started to happen. So like now I get like a little bit of facial hair and stuff a year later, year and a half later. And I still get like breast soreness, but I get it much less now than when I was on the hormones. When I was on the hormones, I also had fluid leakage out of my breasts quite a bit.
Hmm.
And I don't have that so much now. Sometimes, but it's very, very rare and not nearly as much. It used to be so much it would soak the outside of my shirts, like you could see little circles. I don't have that now. Um, Erections are not painful anymore. When I was on hormones, it started on the blockers, but then even just being on the hormones, they were extremely painful, and I couldn't really get them. You know, it was just like any blood flow that went there was so painful, and I don't have that anymore. Um, my gonads were very, very sore for a couple of months. I believe maybe because they might have undergone some atrophy while I was on the stuff. But as far as my testosterone levels show, my testosterone is starting to come back. I'm on the lower end, but I never had surgery on my genital area. So my testosterone is starting to come back slowly. So it's a process. It felt a lot like a lot of the ladies I used to work with were going through menopause. It felt a lot like what they were going through. Just obviously there were obvious differences, but very similar.
And did you kind of you started this conversation saying I was a trans girl for about 8 years. So had you this kind of image of yourself as a girl, and then or what happened with that?
Sort
Yeah,
of. I remember my endocrinologist wanted me to take pictures using Snapchat filters because he said it would feminize my face and show more of what I would look like after surgery. But I never really found like that helped me. It just really made me more insecure. So I didn't really have like an internal image that I was trying to become. You know what I mean? Like they would suggest voice training. I never did it because I didn't feel like I needed it. Just they were suggesting everything under the sun to get done, and I didn't take to all of it because I really didn't have this like end goal image that I was trying to become, if that makes sense. Like I didn't have like this ego ideal that I was like, oh, I have to look exactly like her. You know what I mean?
yeah.
I was just on this path because I was told that I needed this.
It sounds
You
like
know,
they had an image for you, though.
I, I, yeah, they did. And it really makes sense now that I'm older because I remember in some of these appointments, just like the ways that they looked at me and treated me and talked to me and about me. It was almost like I was like their art project. You know what I mean? Like a sculpture instead of a person. And, it felt, I can't even describe the feeling at the time, like a subtle discomfort, like a discomfort that you don't realize is discomfort quite yet, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
um, like a subconscious discomfort that now as an adult I look back on and I'm like, well, that's wildly inappropriate. Like I would never be able to speak about a 13, 14, 15 year old in such a way. You know what I mean?
I do.
Well, I think of imagine you meeting Jazz Jennings. You know what I mean? Because yeah, I presume you have a lot of thoughts around jazz.
I do. I follow Jazz on Instagram. I have a lot of compassion for Jazz, actually. I would genuinely love to meet Jazz, not from a place of opposition. I don't, because, I have friends in Jazz's position, very close friends of mine who had genital surgery, and their surgeries also went wrong because there wasn't enough tissue to work with, and their doctors also don't keep track of them. So I have a lot of compassion for Jazz. I really do. I would love to find a way to approach people in that position with compassion to try to get them some help too. I'm not sure what that help would look like, but I just see she was misled much in the same way that I was. She's much more like I have a very close friend in real life in the same situation, and the only differences between their situation and mine is they came from better backgrounds, so they were able to get all the surgeries and stuff much quicker. Their doctors didn't have to lie to insurances, as far as I know, and all of these other hoops. You know what I mean? And their parents were much more supportive and less questioning than mine.
Yeah, and poor Jazz had the whole drama published to the entire world, so that any going back is it's a whole other story, I imagine.
I feel a lot of compassion for Jazz. I often feel like she's, even though she is a spokesperson for children transitioning, which of course I disagree with, I don't feel like she has much choice in the matter. I feel like she's unfairly vilified a lot because she was just a baby and she never really fully developed. We don't know how going through an estrogen based puberty affects your brain or anything like that. I see a lot of people in the like more conservative space vilify Jazz, and I just feel like that's not fair. Jazz is a victim,
Mm.
and I feel like we need to vilify the doctors that led her and her family down this route. So,
Yeah.
especially her doctors, considering their positions in WPATH.
And your doctors, Medicaid funded your medical transition, and it feels like that, like, people will be wondering, what about, I know you want to speak out because you want to tell people your story, and as I think the statute of limitations, there isn't legal recourse as far as I know with yourself, right? We're not sure.
The statute of limitations for medical malpractice in my state is 2 years with a 6 month discovery period, even if you're a minor. So I would have had to have known and filed a lawsuit by the time I was 15 years old, which obviously isn't going to happen in a case with a significant amount of undue influence. So I am out of the statute for a medical malpractice claim. I've spoken with other attorneys about other claims. None have really seemed to be able to hold up, unfortunately. Um, so that's just led me to just tell my story, and maybe we can put a stop to this culturally so that no more children have to go through what I did.
Thanks, Johnny. It's a
Yeah,
sad story, but you're very brave, and you're just such a lovely presence. It's amazing
yeah,
having been through everything you've been through.
yeah. I admire you, and I think you're doing something heroic.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's taken a lot of meditation to get to this stable point, trust me, because it feels like a lot to bear. I often feel like I don't know if either of you are very into mythology, but I often feel like the Titan Atlas just holding up,
Yeah, I can see
the
that.
weight of
Mhm.
this, and I can't do that forever. So I would like to just lay down the burden and in truth
Mhm.
and let the light of truth carry itself through.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if people want to contact you, if you do want to tell your story, how should they contact you? Do they go through GenSpect, or how do they do it?
So they can go through GenSpect, and you can send them my email.
Yeah.
I have social media. I don't really use it. I have tried to get into it, and I hate it.
I think it's
So
lovely. You've no interest.
yeah, you can contact me by email.
You're an old school 22-year-old.
Yes,
Well,
very much
thanks a
so.
million, Johnny. I know your story will move an awful lot of people, and you tell it so well. And I can't wait to meet you in Albuquerque.
Yes, I'm
Likewise.
very excited for our Albuquerque conference. I feel like the theme "Live Not by Lies" is just so perfect for,
Mm.
the situation. And I think we're gonna do a lot of good for the world and for children. So I look forward to it. And I'm honored to have the chance to participate.
Thank you.
Right. Thank
Yes.
you.